My name is Amy Lishman. I'm the Head of Member Engagement and Deputy Chief Exec at Brighton Chamber, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I'm very excited to welcome today our fantastic team from Britton and Time, who have agreed to look at the changes in flexible work legislation with us and other ways that businesses and business owners can adapt. So Britton and Time are a multi-legal law firm with offices in Brighton and Hove and other offices around the southeast as well. They are, by which we mean they're almost any legal issue you can think of, they can probably help you. So they have a refreshingly creative way of helping clients to achieve their goals and use their combined experience and exceptional legal advice to achieve success. So we're brilliant. We're delighted to welcome three of the team today. So representing Britton and Time today, we have Paul Britton, the Managing Director. We have Rebecca McLean, the solicitor in this is a lot of expertise here. Solicitor, employment, commercial, real estate, education, social housing, finance, and enterprises law. And Olivia Charlick, who is the HR manager. So a really brilliant broad array of expertise there. So I'll be asking Paul, Olivia, and Rebecca some prepared questions, all designed to give you the answers to thoughts that you've perhaps been having about this topic. So let's get started. So this first question is around the flexible working bill. So to you, Rebecca, what is it? What's the flexible working bill and how will it affect businesses going forward?
Thanks, Amy. Well, hello, everyone, and I hope you're having a good afternoon. And also, thank you for that intro. I'd say more of a specialist in employment law at this current stage in my career. But to take your first question, so what is a flexible working bill? Well, I think it's important to first consider the actual statutory provisions for flexible working. And that's currently set out in Part 8A of the Employment Rights Act 1996, specifically in sections 80F to 80I. And then we also have the Flexible Working Regulations 2014. And both of these legal provisions have been amended by the Employment Relations Flexible Working Act 2023. So it's no longer a bill. It became law in July 2023. And just by way of background in terms of when it was a bill, I think the long title of the bill really helps give an explanation of why it was suggested. So the long title name of the bill was "It's a bill to make provision in relation to the right of employees and other workers to request variations to particulars of terms and conditions of employment, including working hours, times, and locations." So that bill received royal assent on the 20th of July, and it became law. And specifically, some of the key changes it makes to the current legal provisions are, or especially in relation to the Employment Rights Act, is that when making a request, an employee no longer has to explain in effect, sort of their main reason for requesting flexible working. The key one is that it's become a day one right. So since the 6th of April, 2024, an employee can request flexible working as a day one right. And that's a key change, whereas previously an employee needed to have 26 weeks service before they could request flexible working. Previously, employees were limited to making one request in any 12-month period, and now currently an employee can make 2 requests in a 12-month period. And additionally, an employer previously had to consider a flexible working request. They had about 3 months to consider it, and now that's been reduced to 2 months to consider a request.
Brilliant.
And I think it's also perhaps helpful just to talk about some of the history of why these changes came about, so why the bill was introduced. I mean, specifically, it was first mentioned in the Conservative Party's manifesto in 2019, and then it was also it was referred to in the Queen's speech in December 2019. And then during the pandemic, the CIPD called for flexible working to be a day one right for all employees. And the government's flexible working task force recommended that flexible working should be the default position for all workers post-pandemic. So the original plan was to consult on flexible working, but that was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And then they actually consulted on that in September 2021. And of course, they came up with these changes. And the bill was actually brought in, as I said, in 2023. It became law, and then commencement regulations were set to bring those changes into force from the 6th of April. So if an employee wishes to, well, actually, I think we're now going to go into question 2. So I might just, it's sort of, they both go hand in hand, really.
They do. So we're going to look now at employee and employer rights within flexible work requests. So what are they?
So excitingly, so since the 6th of April, basically an employee can make, they've got a day one right to request, and they can request flexible working under the statutory scheme. And if they want to do this, they have to trigger this process by making a written request. An employer has a 2-month decision period to consider the request, to consult with the employee, and to notify the employee of the outcome. The employer must deal with the application in a reasonable manner. They can only refuse a request for one of or more of the 8 reasons that's been set out in the Employment Rights Act, and that's specifically under 80G. And those grounds didn't change. So the new law didn't change those grounds. The employer may treat the request as being withdrawn by the employee if without good reason the employee fails to attend a meeting arranged with them to discuss their requests. And that's sort of similar to provisions that applied sort of previously. And of course, if the employer refuses their request, then they should also remind the employee that they have a right to appeal the decision. And then again, the employer would obviously have to consider their appeal. But specifically speaking, if an employer handles a flexible working request poorly, then an employee can start proceedings at the employment tribunal. And there are key reasons why they can do this. So the first one is where they fail to deal with their request in a reasonable manner. The second one is where they fail to notify the employee of the decision on their request within the decision period, that is 2 months. And the third one is where they fail to rely on one of the statutory grounds when refusing their request, as has been set out in the Employment Rights Act. And also if they base their decision on any incorrect facts. And finally, if they treat an employee's request as being withdrawn when they actually didn't have the right to do so. So the other thing to consider as well when dealing with flexible working requests is the ACAS code, and it's a statutory code practice. And since the 6th of April, they've also come up with a code for statutory flexible working schemes. And I think it's important to consider here that if a claim was brought to the Employment Tribunal in relation to flexible working, then the tribunal would have regard to whether an employer considered the code. And the ACAS code basically addresses some key sort of, I think, practical reasons and steps on how an employer should consider a flexible working request. So it reminds us that once an employee makes a flexible working request, an employee has the obligation to consult with that employee. And an employer should also communicate its decision as well as the question of appeals, and remind the employee that they have the opportunity to appeal. And I also thought it was interesting in the foreword where they sort of set out some practical advice on how to deal with flexible working requests. So some of the things they say is, it suggests supporting early and constructive conversations with existing and prospective employees where possible and when it's appropriate. They should also, maybe an employer should also consider building flexibility into job roles when designing jobs and advertising them as being open to discussing flexible working options during recruitment. They remind you that business leaders and line managers play an important role in creating a positive culture around flexible working. And you should be open to all requests and give an employee the confidence that their request will be properly considered and discussed. Excuse me. Managers should also be trained to handle requests fairly and reasonably, and to comply with the additional duties under the Equality Act. So, for example, you might just have a normal employee with no, known disabilities making a request for flexible working. But if you have an employee who has a known disability and they're making a request specific to any of their protected characteristics under the Equality Act, then the employer should really be aware of that and have regard to that, because they'll obviously, part of those flexible working requests will also simultaneously be part of them considering any reasonable adjustments to make for that employee. Any meetings about flexible working requests should be approached with an open mind. They think for both the employer and employee, it's an opportunity for the employer to listen to the reasons why an employee wants to make a flexible working request. They should also perhaps give the employee an option to be accompanied to a meeting to discuss a flexible working request, because it can give them more confidence. And where a request is refused, there should be clear communication about the reasons, and any appeal should be handled in an impartial way, because that's going to be important in ensuring that the trust and confidence between the employer and employee is maintained. And just a final reminder that only employees can make a request for flexible working. Requests cannot be made by agency workers, but there is an exception, and for agency workers who are returning from work from a period of parental leave. And in terms of the types of changes that can be applied for, obviously change of hours, change to the times and location, it's incredibly varied. I mean, a simple request for flexible working can include multiple options: hybrid working, home working, job sharing, flexi time, so term time working. So I think there's lots of variations that can be considered, but ultimately a flexible working request is going to be a variation to the contract. Right, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm not sure how you're going to feel about this, but I do have a follow-up question, because you've given us lots of brilliant information there. So we've had a question through, and I think you briefly mentioned that the business reasons for employers to kind of grounds of not accepting them haven't changed. So one of the questions was around what would be an acceptable business reason for employers to put forward to turn down a flexible working request in terms of location change.
So I think the key, stick to any of the key reasons set out in the Employment Rights Act. So some of those reasons include things such as the burden of additional costs, so i.e. costs of getting equipment for location change, the detrimental effect of the ability to meet customer needs, the inability to reorganise work among existing staff, the fact that you might need to recruit additional staff, whether there's going to be any detrimental impact on the quality of work. So I think so long as you stick to any of the reasons set out in those grounds, and there's lots of it, there are 8 grounds to consider, and I've gone through a couple of them, I think you'll be fine. I think it's if you don't stick to any of those reasons where you'll find a problem.
And we actually had a case just the other week, and the employer had gone through, our employer client had gone through a vigorous recruitment process with this particular candidate and a number of other candidates, but this one had got the job, and it was made abundantly clear that it was office based and it was back end support. And on day 3 of the job, they put in a request to change location, as that question was, to working from home. And my client didn't even know that the burden was on them now to say why they can't work from home and why they can't make that adjustment, and came to us and said, what ground am I going to go on? Now, the really easy one, because they were new to the job, new on the block, was the quality of the work and the performance. So we really laboured the point on those 2, which was, you've just joined, you're 3 days in, you're in your probation period, you need to learn our processes, our systems, how we do things, and learn from the people in the office directly. The employee came back and said, well, I can do these on Zoom, but it's their quality process systems are all in-house on a very secure server. They don't allow VPNs or people to dial in. So that was the back, to say why you can't do it. But on day 3 and the hours involved, I think we recorded around 12 hours of legal time. And when you're going to your client, so all of these, all of you people here, HR executives, your hours, your time that goes into this, creating policies, creating processes. I mean, really the best bit of advice that I can give you is to look at it now, have a hypothetical scenario and design a process and a template that you could just quickly pull in and say, right, this is the guide, let's start filling out this and getting some evidence that we can annex to it. Because quite often what our clients do is, if they do it on their own, they might just make sweeping statements why the employee can't do certain things. But if you can support it with independent documents like your processes or your software provider or how your security works within your organization, it's almost like nailing the coffin. They can't really come back at you. But like Rebecca said, they can make 2 requests now in any 12-month period. It used to be 1, but they can come back at you again and make another request. And obviously, once they've done the 2, in some ways, that's great because you've got 12 months of peace and quiet where you can get on with other HR-related things. I mean, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks,
I mean, it's just a
Rebecca.
real working example of where, the employee just pulls it out of the bag and says, I'd like to now work from home.
Yeah. We may come back to, I imagine there might be some other questions or follow-up questions related to this topic, but just conscious of time, so I'm going to move on to the next questions, and then we might revisit if we get any additional ones. But I think, Paul, you've just illustrated it's the examples are going to be quite specific, and it's working through those, and which is where you come in, obviously, as well. Brilliant, thank you so much. Right, so moving on to our next question. Why, so this is looking really at the bigger picture and workplace culture and practices. So what are people entering the workforce today looking for, and is it at odds nowadays with most most workplace practices? So over to you, Paul.
My voice again. I think it hasn't really changed very much, at least what in my adult life. I mean, we're looking at, I think what you want to focus on is Gen Z, so the ones entering the workplace now, and I think they were born between 97 and 2012. They're still looking for income. Okay, so salary is a really important element to why they look for jobs. They will go through the job boards and they will compare what salaries you're offering. And actually, if you're recruiting and you're silent on the salary, it might just prevent candidates from applying in the first place, especially if your ad is amongst others that do advertise the salary. The second thing that they're probably still looking for are benefits, but benefits have changed over the last 2 decades. So whereas I may have looked for a healthcare policy of some sort when I joined, and in my head, I might be thinking, oh, well, it's just if I've got critical illness. What they're looking for now is actually more ongoing supporting benefits that help with their welfare, because Gen Z is becoming very well known as like an anxious generation. They worry a lot. They even worry about the commute to work and how they're going to get to work. I found that's come up in interviews with that generation recently, as if it's like the employer's problem now to work out their route to work. But they want things like counselling, mentoring, even executives. When I've interviewed executives, they want that kind of executive coaching to help them through their career. I think the third thing that comes up a lot is work-life balance. So when we talk about flexible working, sometimes they ask for compressed working hours as well. So they might say something like, I work Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, but actually I'd like to work Monday to Thursday and compress the Friday hours or distribute them over the other days. and that just helps them have, I mean, what I would say is a 3-day weekend. But they see that as a real benefit in the workplace. So if you're not offering, if you want to encourage this Gen Z to apply for jobs, you've got to have your salary above the threshold of your competitors. You've got to labour the point about your benefits, and in some way focus your ad onto how you are going to help them balance their work life, and give, if you're prepared to do it as an employer, compressed hours, flexible working. I know during COVID, one of the policy documents that became very topical and quite vogue was super remote working policies, where people were obviously not required to come to work, but they were allowed to work from home. And some took it upon themselves to move to different time zones, and in extreme cases to Australia, where there's 12 hours difference. And our clients were saying to us, can you draft us as well, they didn't know what they really wanted, but we started calling it a super remote working policy to ensure that those employees were still working on British time zones. So I think they're the main 3 things. Are they at, I hope that goes to the core of what the question was. If not, stop me, tell me to shut up and I'll rethink it. Is it at odds, just reading on my other screen, is it at odds with most workplace practices? I think, I mean, it depends what business that you're in. Clearly, if it's retail and it's high street, then they've got to be client facing. You can't really sell garments from home. But if it is a back end process, you've got to try and always look for the silver lining in the cloud, right? And if working from home, if they can be productive and you can deploy systems at a certain cost that may have to front load, but over time you save on desk, computer, electric, broadband, even office space, which we all know is still astronomically high in all areas, particularly Brighton, Hove and in central London. If you can save, then why not? You know, I think if everyone puts the right things in place, then it will turn into a very positive experience. So I don't believe it's always at odds, except for in those really blatant client-facing areas, reception, meet and greet, and in some cases you just might want people to come in on the occasion. I mean, our solicitors come into the office because our clients want to know where their lawyer is, and they'll just turn up and say, I've got these documents for Paul. Yeah, can I speak to him? Because they just want to have that face, that particularly baby boomers, you know, they who are actually coming to the end of their working life now, they're starting to widen down. And I read the other day that Gen Z is actually about to overtake baby boomers. So don't worry about what baby boomers wanted in the workplace. You've really got to turn your attentions now and your sights to, you know, Gen Z, millennials like me. Amy, I think you're a millennial as well. You might be Gen Z.
I'm a millennial.
Okay, yeah. So millennials focus, but Gen Z, you really got to look at them generation, who are actually doing financially very well, according to the Financial Times and The Economist. They're a very successful generation, working on the gig economy and, you know, working from home and making those sort of things work.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Olivia, is there anything you wanted to add to that question before we move on to the next one?
I think the only thing I would add is to touch on what Paul said is the companies really looking at how this can be beneficial. So I appreciate that a lot of companies might be quite resistant to change or resistant to put in some provisions for this, just thinking it might not work, when actually some trial periods and actually just seeing what is possible and open your eyes a little bit might actually be beneficial for the business in the long term. But like I said, like Paul said, it's not going to be in every industry. It's not even going to be in every role in every company that's possible. It might just be a pool of, you know, 1 or 2 job roles that is possible, and the rest of it it's not. So really you would need to look at the bigger picture. You know, in my experience, I've seen you know, flexi start times and end times work really well for companies because it allows them to operate, you know, longer times or be, you know, available for customers, whether that's a call center or something like that, that they've been able to be operationally open for longer to service their clients better during that time. Another one is like job sharing. I know that, you know, you have to find the right mix for that one. In my experience, you always have to find the right personalities and work ethics so that these 2 or 3 individuals can work very closely together. But in the bigger picture, actually, again, it might be more availability, especially if it's in a, you know, a personal assistant role. You've got 2 people instead of 1, and you've got more hours covered, and you've got more brains and more ideas and things like that. So I do think there's a positive spin on that, but like as Paul said, it will not work in every single role, and you know, the company has to assess that. And to touch on, I suppose, the COVID situation as well, you know, I do think post-COVID and even during COVID, people really value important moments in life, and I think they come to realize that during, you know, maybe health concerns or spending more time with family or whatever that is during the COVID pandemic, or just taking health as a priority and taking time out to go do their physio, or, you know, go see a doctor, or, you know, go to a sports day or whatever it is. I think those important moments in employees' life, and the flexibility to allow that, I think can sometimes be, yeah, really valuable. And regarding the Gen Z area as well, I do think, you know, they are such a different generation. We're learning so much about them, that, you know, they are looking at other income streams, and they do sometimes have a lot of side hustles going on. The flexibility does allow them to continue that, whether it's a hobby or an income stream. I think that's valued, and they do very much care more about the company they're working for. Does it align with their values? Are they sustainable? You know, they're spending a lot of time at work. They want to enjoy it, which actually I think compared to other generations, they're a lot more grafter. They just need to provide, and they need to focus on the career, and they kind of suck it up and do whatever. When actually this new generation are a lot more, I'm not sure what the word is, mindful.
They're different.
Yeah, mindful of where they're spending their time and their energy. And if it doesn't suit them, I can't see them staying too long. But
I always find that HR directors that I work with, they get it. They get the law. They know that it's here and it's here to stay, at least until there's a massive change, like a huge recession or something. But the challenge comes is when the HR director, executive professional, has to educate other directors, other decision makers in the business, and say, look, it is here to stay, and we either deal with it as positively as we can and embrace it and make it work for us, or we bury our heads in the sand. We may face an employment tribunal. And I'm telling you now, you don't get much change out of £20,000-30,000 with good lawyers in the employment tribunal. So if you want a couple of those and you end up running into 6 figures, it might just be, I should imagine, incredibly cheap to just get on with it now. You know, Gen Z, they're more likely to be depressed. I mean, these are the things that are coming out. They're more likely to be depressed than any other generation. In fact, any other generation put together. So you add them all up, well, the chances, it's Gen Z are more likely to be, they're more likely to change their sex from what they were identified as at birth. So as a responsible employer, you should be thinking about that now. You're going to end up with employees in your workspace who say that, for my example, that I'm no longer a man and I identify as a woman, or I'm non-binary and I'm a them and a they. And you've just really got to see it come in and adapt to it now, rather than be caught off guard. And it's educating other directors, other decision makers. Just send them to me and I'll teach them.
Thanks, Paul.
Right.
Thank you, Olivia. So looking now at some quick wins perhaps for companies to implement to improve retention rates. Olivia, what are your thoughts on what employers and companies can do straight away, quick fixes for this side of things?
Well, I'd say quick wins, not quick fixes. I think there's things that you can act on immediately that I think can be free or at minimal cost to the company, because I appreciate, you know, it's cost of living crisis and companies are affected by financials as well. So, you know, the first thing I would suggest is utilising the biggest and most important asset your company probably has, the most expensive asset, which is your staff. So the first thing I would do is go and ask your staff what they want. And because ultimately, you know, you can go and assume something and put it into place and waste all this money putting it in, and actually it's not even what your staff want. You've got this free asset, you've got this invaluable information, go and speak to them. So that would be the first thing I do, because there's so much information of what's going well, what's not going so well, how can the company improve, you know, what benefits do you want or would you find valuable? And that's where you'd be focusing your attention on, rather than wasting your time looking at everyone else and actually applying it, and it's just not relevant to the demographic that you have. You know, you can do this through surveys, you can speak to them through focus groups, or even just one-to-one meetings, just to try and gain, you know, some trust as well from your employees and have those discussions. I do think that helps engagement as well when they have an opportunity or platform to speak. They feel heard, and also when it's actioned as well, they feel like, you know, I've contributed to the company and their success, and I feel that can go a long way as well with retention. I think it's worth both speaking to new starters and long-standing members. I think it's really important to see both sides of, okay, how is someone new coming into the business? What did they think? Because they're a fresh pair of eyes. So use what they're saying, even if it's tiny improvements along the way. It's the first question I will ask them. Tell me what I can do better on your onboarding process, or tell us what's missing so that we can add it. And same with long-standing members, you know, they probably know your business so well. They've got the ear to the ground. They know exactly how processes work and don't work. And they've probably got the quick fixes of, you know what, this just isn't working. This is a solution. Let's do it. The company just needs to be, you know, and executives need to just be open-minded to hearing what that is, and not resistant about it, because actually they could be, yeah, life-changing for the company. So that would be number one. The second thing, which I do think is a minimal expense, but it is something you can act on immediately, and that's looking at how you reward and recognise your staff. You know, there's so many small and considerate ways that you can recognise it without, you know, putting in massive benefits, but and these aren't to replace the benefits, these are just to show and recognise your staff. So whether that's hitting sales targets or business development opportunities, or length of service acknowledgements, birthdays, cards, cakes, certificates, whatever it is, like they're just small tokens that employees value because they feel seen and they feel appreciated. But like I said, it's not to replace the benefits. It really is just to acknowledge and create a nice environment for them to be in. It makes a nicer place to work when you feel acknowledged on those things, especially if it's your birthday, for example. I would also, regarding the benefits, look at what they want and ask them. Like I said, you're wasting a lot of money on benefits and implementing them, and actually people not using them or valuing them. It's actually a company resource wasted. And as Paul mentioned before, you know, we do have such a wide variety of generations now in the workforce, with Gen Z all the way up, and actually with life expectancy now growing and retirement being pushed back, you're going to have more. So really what someone at, you know, 65, 70 in the workplace is looking for is not the same as an 18-year-old. So I really think it's looking at what your benefit packages are, and do they service your demographic? And if it's not, have the variety that does suit at least one or two for each of those individuals at whatever life stage they're in. And development, I think, is really important. It's a way that you can reward and recognise staff as well. So a lot of exit interviews that I've held throughout my career, a lot of them are primarily down to, I don't see a future with this company, I can't see a clear career path. So really it's about looking at what that looks like and communicating it, because you might have an idea as an executive or a manager for this individual and where their path is, but if you're not communicating that and having those discussions and helping them get there, that's where I think you would lose staff. And that's kind of the conversations I've had. So I think there is a lot of focus to be put on career pathways as well. And the third thing I would say to look at is your employee experience as a whole. And this is really, you know, the advice I'm giving is really looking internally at your resources that you have available to you immediately and at minimal cost. So the employee experience really is you looking at that journey from when someone is thinking about applying for you all the way up to when they're exiting or retiring even. And really the retention is, you need to look at where in that journey are you losing your staff. You know, if you're losing them in the first 3-4 months, right, I need to look at this integration? Are they a cultural fit, etc.? You know, if it's halfway through, am I developing them? Am I giving them the opportunities? And saying, you know, are they getting forgotten about? Are they getting left behind? Are they getting the right skills they need to do their job to move with the company forward? So I do think there's a lot to be like broken down in the employment, in the employee experience, for you to reflect on and to what to do with that. With the, I was going to say, especially with policies as well, I think that's quite an important one to review, because I think that will probably lead into another question. The values and the vision of the company, I would really look at that in the employee experience as well, and make sure it's fully implemented and integrated, so that actually, yeah, everything's aligned and they understand why they're doing it, and it sort of fits with the company as well. So they're the things I would do to retain staff, and things that are available to you immediately.
Thank you.
I'm just sitting here on the edge of my seat. Like, I just want to, whenever I hear these comments, I just want to get involved. I think what really gives employers the advantage at the interview stage is knowing what candidates come in through the door and understanding when they entered the workplace. What lawyers learn, we learn so much pointless information. When parents are going through divorce, children of the age between 5 and 7, they're at what we call the impressionable age of development. So they're really affected when parents divorce. I've got a really good point, just let me come to it, right? And they can't see anything other than through their own eyes. So if mum and dad are getting divorced, they blame themselves. So parents that are divorcing with children that age, we go heavily on advice about the children and ring fencing them, because they'll blame themselves. Teenagers, when they go through, all of us, when we go through our teenage years, we develop our relationship with food. So if we eat unhealthy foods in our teenage years, we're going to be statistically more unhealthy later on in life. If we have good eating habits in those years, they'll carry on through life. When people enter the workplace, if they enter during a certain economical climate, for example, COVID, where there was no jobs and they're looking for jobs, desperately looking for jobs, you'll find that those sort of people are happy to just take jobs. They just want a job. They hate being unemployed. If the generation comes into the workplace where there are just so many jobs and they can pick and choose and they can move around, that will carry on through the rest of their life. So when you're and it's the same with benefits and what they're looking for in the workplace. So when you've got someone coming through the door, do a quick calculation. They never put their age on there, but we all know you can work it out from school years and things like that. Or in the interview, you can say, so when did you graduate? What year was that? And you can kind of work it out. If you really want to acquire that talent, you can start tailoring what you offer as a business to that employee and say, look, we do this and we do that, and you won't find this from another employer, and you'll be making all the right sound bites to get that talent to join your firm. I hope that was helpful.
Always. And we did have a question that came in advance, which was about how to really make that noise that you're a flexible working employer. And I guess, Paul, you've just made the point that you have to be talking about it in all stages of
writing, articulate it in your job ads, in your contract, in your policies, all that sort of stuff. I mean, you would probably, what you want to do if you go away today is you want to think about what your employee value proposition is, because that's what we're always advising our clients to draw up. And obviously pay is a big part of it, but development, growth, rewards, and recognition, those other 4 things should all form part of your EVP.
Thank you, Paul. This is linked nicely to the next question for Olivia. Is, we have mentioned salary a couple of times today, and needing to be able to compete with your competitors. But what happens if you're a local business and that you can't compete with these larger or national companies for top talent? What can companies do, Olivia?
I had a structured answer for this, but I'm going to flip it because Paul's just mentioned it. So really, like you said about the employee value proposition. Now, I know a lot of companies know unique selling point. They know that in marketing. They know how to target their audience so well regarding their competitors and their product, their service. But really, it's flipping that on its head and applying that on an employment side of, okay, as an employer, what can we offer employees? So really, it's using the same method, you're just transferring it across of how can we sell ourselves as an employer of choice as well. So really, it's understanding, you know, who you are as a company, what values do you have, what benefits can you offer in exchange for, you know, their time, their skills, their experience, and also why should they choose you over anyone else? And so part of the thing that we've done at Britton and Time, we've applied elsewhere, is, you know, looking at competitors, do that competitor analysis. And there's two things that you can do. You can either level up and do what they're doing, or you offer something completely different. We go down the offer something different route. We don't want to be the same as other law firms. And I'm sure other, you know, if it's a very competitive environment, why would you offer the same as everyone else? What's unique about that? So really, it's looking at what you could possibly do with the information that you can gather from your competitors, but also, like I said, speak to your staff. When you know why they love working with you or why they've stayed so long, and you've got a high retention rate and you've got, you know, a handful of people that's been with you 5-10 years, they're the ones you need to speak to, because they're going to tell you the honest, authentic answers that people want to know. You know, I don't need to pull up a marketing campaign of made up stuff when I've got everything available to me in a really authentic way that I would never be able to you know, voice or construct. So I think that's really helpful. And like Paul said as well, in interview process, understanding that about employee value proposition has helped me further, because I've asked them why have you wanted to join us and what makes us different than others, and actually they've given a whole nother perspective as to why. And so that's made it really, really clear in my eyes as to how to position us and how to advertise us and how to sell us as an employer of choice, because they've made it very clear for me and very easy for me, because I've asked the right questions at the right times across, you know, people that have considered joining us, people that has joined us, people that have been with us a long time, and pulling that all together is your answer.
Yeah.
I do think you know, if you wanted to do a survey internally as well, that also helps. I think, you know, that type of information can be captured in any kind of way that you see fit. But like I said, one-to-one focus groups, etc., like I mentioned before, you can ask these questions in that. As long as you build trust with the individuals or the employees, I do think you'll get the honest answers, and then you can use that, you know, to improve on or to also promote, depending on what they say. And the second thing that I would want to raise here as well is the employer branding strategy. So this is kind of a new concept, really, is how we brand ourselves externally. And it's, once you know your EVP, it's, okay, how do I share that? And what does that look like across, again, people that have not necessarily only applied to us, because everyone thinks that that process starts then, when actually it's not. It's when they, as soon as they engage with the employer, that could be by following, it could be a like, it could be an interaction at a networking event, you know, that is your first interaction with that company, and they know about that company at that point in time. So really, you could be attracting talent without even knowing that you are, because you're now on their radar. They've had a good experience. Oh, they've seen what you post. Oh, now they've seen this job advert. So really, you're contacting passive candidates in creating a talent pool as such, because they're starting to follow you and they're interested in working for you. And then further down the line, an opportunity comes up and they will apply. So I think it's looking at those passive pools and not being afraid to also reach out to them if you have the means to allow you to do that. I think it's sort of like a bit of a taboo subject of, oh, can I contact someone that's not even interested in joining or looking for a job? Well, actually, yes, at the moment in the recruitment market, it's kind of how it's going. You have to approach passive candidates. And if it's not for now, it might be in 6 months, it might be in a year. But either way, the talent is there, you're already engaging, and you're going to grab them for later. So for the employer branding strategy as well, it's really how you look on the outside as well. So people want to know authentically what it is like to work where you are. So there's many ways that you can share that. You know, we've experimented and tried a few things as well. So Social media obviously is the easiest and free way that you could do that with your followers, with people that are interested, or with your network. So really behind the scenes, what is it like? And, you know, footage or videos or photos or, you know, posts from your own staff testimonials, all those things can really, really help bolster your employee branding strategy. And it's worked really well. Yeah, I think that was
Thanks.
that was it.
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, we the chamber recruited a couple of times last year, and we for the first time did videos about what it was like to work at the chamber. And you know, it was it is a bit of work, but it gave us as employees a bit of a boost, because we were like, I mean, we're only a tiny team as well, but you know, we started to ask ourselves, I was like, oh yeah, this is why we love it. And then it does just come across so well. It was one of the best investments from a marketing perspective, I would say, last year. And that's not in terms of cost. It was in terms of human time to actually put it together. It was great.
Great.
Really good. So we've got a couple of questions left and about 8 minutes to go. So as I said at the start, so much content today. So I'm going to turn now to ask about workplace culture. So how do you create and sustain a workplace culture that appeals to employees and balance it with your company's objectives? So this is a question for Paul. Over to you.
Okay. So I think it's really important, firstly, to know what your company's core values are. And so if you haven't already, then you need to sit down and thrash those out. And it could be things like, you know, integrity. And if you've got a candidate in front of you that it hasn't been honest or transparent, then it might not align straight away with your company values. Innovation, being customer centric, looking at teamwork, accountability, respecting others. These sort of values you need to test when you're interviewing candidates, because if they don't align with your company's values, then you're starting off with this like recipe for disaster. And the company values, the leaders in the business, they must set the examples for these. So you can't have a situation where they're not demonstrating and actively demonstrating. It's all very well saying I'm honest and I have integrity, but they've got to be able to demonstrate those on a regular basis, either through social media or through company events or one-to-ones or whatever they do, to show that they hold or possess these values. Because I think hiring the right fit is critical for building that sort of culture within a business. It starts at the top and then it filters its way down, but when you get lower down, you've got to make sure those people coming in, you can teach people skills. I mean, that's actually quite easy as long as they're capable and competent. But what you can't teach people are values, because they tend to be quite inherent, just like the examples I gave you previously, the three with the children, teenagers, and people coming into the workplace. Their values are going to already be well installed into who they are. Communicating transparently. There's a lot of conversations over empowering employees. I'm not such a great lover of it. I know that Olivia is. I just think that businesses should be led more by, I think people look up to someone to lead, and I think sometimes when you give employees too much power, it kind of dilutes what you're trying to achieve. The recognition and reward, and you know, collaborating, fostering a collaborative environment where everyone is going to pull together and work together. I think that's the best thing for culture and sustaining it, getting the right people at the bottom and having that trickle down from the top.
Thank you, Paul.
I'm conscious of time.
Yes, I am too. I'd be remiss though if I didn't allow Olivia to say to add anything. But I appreciate you have said a lot as well. And we have a great final question to Rebecca. So I think Olivia's given me the go ahead to move on to that one. We've got so much to follow up in terms of the follow-up email as well. I know Paul's just popped something in the chat. So this is a conversation that I think everyone will keep having, and hopefully we'll reach out to you all as well. Right, over to Rebecca for the final question. So we talked a little bit about employee benefits throughout this session today. So how can companies manage the introduction, change or withdrawal of employee benefits?
I love a good policy, and I always think it's important to have your sort of company's, processes set out in a policy. It makes it really easy to deal with change, to deal with the introduction of things. So even with this flexible working, just set out policy, set out what you expect to see in a request. You don't have to actually follow the whole statutory thing. They sort of say you don't have to expand on the reason for the request, but I think it'd be helpful for employers to know, have it a detailed policy, set out how you're going to handle it as well. It just makes it easy when you're actually dealing with things. And then I think in the long term, it helps you. And then you can easily update it when you're going through changes or when there have been changes in law. So I think that's a good thing. And if you're really struggling with it, then consult an employment lawyer. Get an employment lawyer to sort of help you with that and review any of your policies, update those policies. But I think have it there, and then you can easily update it every year or whenever the relevant change has come in. And I kept that short because I'm conscious of time.
You did as well. Thank you very much. I don't know if any of the team want to add anything before we close and I wrap up. No, I think we've well,
just if anyone that's tuned in, if they do have an issue or specific issue that's come up in the workplace and they do want a consultation, then either Rebecca or I will happily give them a free consultation to deal with any issues that they have. So we'll just offer that.
Brilliant.
Here.
Thank you, Paul. We'll pop that in the follow-up just to remind. That's a very kind offer. As I kind of said before, there probably is some the flexible work requests and grounds for accepting or denying them is probably something that a few people on this call are looking at right now. So we'll hopefully get some connections for you afterwards as well. So that just remains for me to say thank you so much to Paul, Olivia and Rebecca for their time in sharing their expertise, the experience as well. I think always you've added the colour to the policies and to the legislation and the real world examples, and I think that's brilliant to illustrate some of the challenges and opportunities. So thank you all. So for those of you who are new to Brighton Chamber, we're a not-for-profit independent membership organisation in Brighton with the aim of helping businesses and charities and social enterprises to connect with each other, to learn and to grow, whatever that growth means to you. So very big thanks to you all for joining us today. I hope you have a good rest of the afternoon and hope to see you at another event soon.